This is all about maps. Is this disturbing here? I can close the door if you want. About 3 years ago, Margaret and I were talking about history, and she confessed to me that she was interested in old maps, of which she has a good collection. In fact, she's brought along a few to show this evening. Then she revealed that she had a particular fascination with a set of antique county maps that were remarkable, she said, because they were full of naked ladies. This rather fired my imagination and started me on my own quest to collect all the maps of Warwickshire. So the story begins with Michael Drayton, one of our local poets and a contemporary of Shakespeare. He came to prominence in the Elizabethan era. Many of his works consisted of historical poetry, and he spent 20 years writing the epic Polyolbion, celebrating all the points of topographical or antiquarian interest in Great Britain. To give you a flavour of his verse, in the 13th song of Polyolbion, we find, "Scarce ended they their song, but Avon's winding stream by Warwick entertains the high-complexioned leam. And as she thence along to Stratford on doth strain, receiveth little Hyla the next into her train. Then taketh in the Stour, the brook of all the rest, which that most goodly vale of Red Horse loveth best." I think that's quite enough of that. But it gives you a flavour of his style of rhyming couplets. Polyolbion was published in 1613 with a companion volume of maps engraved by William Hole. Here is the map of Warwickshire, surely the strangest map of the county ever made. Can you hold it up, please, Margaret? It's in the pile to your right there. You'll find it somewhere down there. Oh. So here it is. It's little less than A3 in size.
There. As you can see, it's all rivers and no towns, and a few women wearing the same clothing.
Exactly, yes. Precisely. So there are a couple of things mentioned, the line of Edge Hill and the Rollright stones, which arguably are not even in Warwickshire, but Oxfordshire. The towns of Coventry, Warwick and Tamworth are identified, along with the sites of the Forest of Arden, Dunsmore Heath, and the Vale of Red Horse. But it's somewhat random what's in there. At the centre of the map is Diana, the huntress, with her bow and quiver full of arrows. She's reclining in a tree stump in the Forest of Arden, looking rather the worse for wear. The goddess of Warwick wears a castellated hat. In the southwest of the county, we can infer that Stratford is here and Ulster is there, but nothing is marked on the map to indicate them. The size of each emerging nymph seems to be roughly proportional to the size of the river. The Hyla is now called the Dean and joins the Avon at Charlecote. I rather like the metaphor of the country as a living thing in which the rivers are the veins in its system of circulation. And moreover, that each has a guardian nymph to protect it from mistreatment and pollution. If only they could. I'm now going to show you a series of maps of Warwickshire in chronological order and look at how Stratford is depicted in each case. And this sort of follows the train of history over the past 300 to 400 years. All of these were produced after the Reformation, and they range in size from a playing card to a tablecloth. The very first map of the county was drawn and published by Christopher Saxton in 1576. Saxton had been commissioned by the Queen and Privy Council to survey all the counties of England and Wales. This map of Warwickshire has, Warwickshire and Leicestershire, two counties, has a scale of about 1/4 of an inch to the mile. That is to say, 4 miles to the inch. Of all the county maps I will show, this is the only one for which I don't have an original. I'm still looking for it, and hopefully I'll find it sooner or later, but it's quite rare. This one is a printed reproduction made in 1975 of the map in the British Museum. I should also point out that in every case, what was produced was an atlas containing separate maps for all of the counties of England. So I've been collecting only the maps of Warwickshire, where collections have been disbound. In general, these were sold as a boxed set of loose pages, which the purchaser could have bound for an extra charge. I'm going to show you, in each case, the big picture and then zoom in and show you the local area around Stratford. You can see that this map was not meant for everyday use. It's beautifully engraved, carefully printed, and lavishly coloured by hand, intended to be a work of art and learning for the grand libraries of aristocrats and gentlemen.
Are we still on Christopher Sachs?
We're still on Saxton, yes.
Yes.
Saxton surveyed the land by a series of compass traverses, climbing hills and church towers that commanded extensive views and taking readings of angles. In these maps, he shows rivers, hills, and bridges, but no roads. He uses standard symbols for towns and villages with a scale of miles, but neither compass nor key to the graphics. So here's the area local to us. It has the symbol for a small town rather than a village, for Stratford. It shows the bridge. Hugh Clopton's bridge had been built nearly 100 years before this map was made. The names of all the surrounding villages are recognisable. The antiquary, John Learland, had visited Stratford in 1542 and described it in his itinerary. But this work by Saxton was the first ever map of the region, published when William Shakespeare was just 8 years old. Shakespeare, of course, was familiar with maps in Henry IV, Part 1, written 20 years later in 1596. The rebels look over a map and discuss how they will carve up the land amongst themselves. Right, next one. It's a small one, yes.
Oh.
Yes. So the great cartographer Mercator had made an atlas of all of Europe, including England and Wales, in 1595, big folio size prints. After Mercator's death, the Flemish engraver and cartographer Jodocus Hondius bought Mercator's plates, and in 1607 he published a scaled-down version of the big folio atlas, which he called an Atlas Minor. And each page is this size. And it was a great success, translated into several languages, printed through many editions. King Lear, written at about the same date, opens with the king using a map to divide his kingdom into 3 parts. This page shows the whole of southeast England with 16 counties. Warwickshire is in the top left corner, outlined in blue. Just to be clear, all maps printed before about 1850 were monochrome. It was simply black on paper. And all of the colouring was added afterwards by hand. Whoever coloured this one has been a bit over-enthusiastic, I think. It was a bit too much colour. But this is an original sheet from 1607. So if we look closely, it is most gratifying to see that Stratford appears on the map as one of only 8 towns in the county. This must indicate that even in those days, the town had international appeal. Well, the best known of all the early maps was published in 1610 by John Speed. Most people, if you ask them to name an early map of any county, they'll say John Speed. This is the one. This was also engraved in Flanders in the workshop of Jodocus Hondius. At that time, the Flemings were way ahead in terms of their ability in engraving and printing. It's no wonder that later Holland became an international leader in publishing, rivaling London. So this map includes town plans of Warwick and Coventry. Speed had benefited from the patronage of Sir Fulk Greville, later Lord Brooke, and he made a suitably fulsome tribute, which you see in that circle on the right, to the arms of such honourable families as have been Earls of Warwick. So we could see who he was trying to please. The local detail on the map is similar to that of Saxton, but with some revision of place names and spelling, but still no roads. The town is called Stratford upon Arwen, and the graphical symbol is different. Bridgeton now appears south of the river. Manorial estates are shown by a standard symbol, this sort of green circle with a fence around it, at Goldicote, Clopton, Hampton, and Cowton. Also, the hundreds are marked as here at the top in Barlacquay. During the English Civil War, commencing in 1642, the need arose for a cheap and convenient map for getting around on horseback, something that a lieutenant or a commander could just slip into his saddlebag and take along with him. So it was no good having something the size of Speed's atlas. It was completely impractical. So this map by Thomas Jenner is only 4 inches square, and the paper is about 6 inches square. And it includes this mileage grid as a ready reckoner of the distance between each pair of towns. Reading across the line for Stratford, we see that it is 8 miles to Warwick, 13 to Coventry, and 18 to Nuneaton. I think those are all underestimates, actually, but that might have been just in a straight line based on measurement across the map, and not necessarily the distance by the roads. But the roads are not marked, so who's to know? The map in the bottom right corner is only about 2 inches high and is rather minimal, but does show the general layout of the main towns in relation to the rivers, as well as the county border. No functioning bridge is shown at Stratford because, in this date, 1644, the parliamentarian troops had knocked down one arch in the bridge, and so it was no longer viable to cross the river there. Right. Next. In 1656, during the Commonwealth period, Sir William Dugdale published his monumental Antiquities of Warwickshire. Included in the book was a county map engraved by Robert Vaughan, probably based on a drawing by Dugdale himself. There are still no roads, except that the 3 Roman streets forming a triangle around the county are shown. Watling Street, running from bottom right to top left. Ricknell Street, running more or less north to south from the left. And of course the Fosse Way, running from bottom left to upper right. Looking closely at the detail shows that the map is rather sparse, with a standard symbol for a tree used to fill in some of the spaces. Instead of upon, the Latinate soup is used for super. Thus we are Stratford soup Avon and Atherstone soup Stour. Curiously, on this map, estates such as Goldicote and Clopton do not appear. Dugdale's book also included separate maps for the 400s within the county, that is, Barlick, Kington, Knightlow, and Hemlingford. These are at a larger scale and include more detail, such as the estates here at Ragley and Oversley Court. Stratford is shown by a representation of Holy Trinity Church, although of course at this date it was yet to have a steeple. Well, it had a very squat wooden structure with lead, but not the proper steeple that it has now. Borden Hill is marked on this map. For the first time, some roads are drawn. Stratford sits on the road from Warwick to Bidford, and to the northwest is the road to Henley. Surprisingly, no road is shown from Bridgetown toward Banbury, although the bridge had been restored in 1651. Now to the Restoration. Charles II and Queen Catherine apparently rather enjoyed card games, reportedly sometimes even playing on Sundays. After the joyless disapproval of the Puritan regime, however, card playing and gambling became popular pastimes during the Restoration era, spanning all ranks of society. By a surprising coincidence, at that time there were 52 counties, 39 in England and 13 in Wales. And so it was natural that county maps would make ideal designs for a set of 52 cards. This is the Warwickshire card in a set published by Robert Morden in 1676 and is the smallest map in my collection. It's just over 2 inches wide and 3.5 inches high. It represents the one of diamonds, that is the ace. The red diamond symbol has been overprinted or painted by a stencil, something like silk screening process on top of the black print. The reverse side of the card is completely blank. Zooming in, we see that the River Avon seems to be flowing a different course from usual, and that the towns are rather randomly placed. There is only one road to be seen. Although it passes through Stratford, its route is uncertain. Nevertheless, these cards gave players the opportunity to learn a bit of geography when their minds wandered from the game itself. Because remember, every card in the hand was different, and so they were all different designs. If we were designing a set of cards now, we would probably have a Warwickshire set with a single map of Warwickshire on the reverse side and the standard pattern for the cards on the obverse. But this was done in a different way. In 1675, a new type of atlas was published, showing single routes between major towns. This was quite an innovative and radical way of representing the routes from the viewpoint of the traveller. This reflected increasing travel within England and the planning of journeys for passengers by coach or for goods by cart. John Ogilby's strip maps provided a step-by-step guide for a coachman to visualize each section of the route. The first page, I can't see which it is, covers Banbury to Bridgenorth. Banbury to Bridgenorth, it's the one with the hunting scene at the top. And the route, if you can follow here, passes through Stratford, Cowton, Bromsgrove, and Kidderminster. The compass direction on each strip changes subtly as the road bends around. Another page in the atlas, it's the other one that Margaret has there, shows the route from Gloucester to Coventry, passing through Cheltenham, Winchcombe, Camden, Stratford, and Warwick. So this route is from southwest to northeast. The other one was from southeast to northwest. So they're more or less crossing one another, intersecting at Stratford. These pages were engraved by Wenceslaus Hollar, who had previously made the engravings in Dugdale's book. And they include charming illustrations of life in each region. They're really works of art. These will all be laid out here, so I invite you afterwards to come and have a close look at them. It's interesting to compare side by side the representation of Stratford in these two maps. You'd really expect it to be the same graphic. just the different roads in play, but they're surprisingly different. This is at 1 inch to the mile. 1 inch on the map is 1 mile on the road. And so considerable detail should have been possible. But it seems that they don't correspond to the actual town plan, sadly. Just an indication of houses and some cross streets. I like the little notes along the road where it says a post, a rill, arable, heath ground, and so on. These animate the map. Well, at last, in 1693, a conventional map was published that included roads. This is the first map that actually shows a network of roads over the county. But the underlying cartography was still that of Saxton 120 years earlier. But the roads had been added to the plates. I think it's over near where you are, Jan. Roads had been added to the plates with many other additions and place names. Also, John Speed's town plans were included for Warwick, Coventry, and Leicester. Yeah, bring it into the light so that you can be seen. This map looks like rather like the Speed map at first glance, but it's much rarer. Intersecting at Stratford are the two roads from the Ogilvy's strip maps, but not the roads to Bidford, Henley, or Wellesbourne. This suggests that a local survey had not been carried out, but that the engraver had just copied Ogilvy's routes onto the Saxton map. But at least there are some roads to be seen. For the first half of the 18th century, the situation remained much the same. Engraving and printing processes improved, but always from copper plates, impressed directly onto handmade paper. Sorry, I don't think I got that one out. It's only about smaller than A4 in size. Maps became cheaper and more plentiful for the convenience of coachmen on the new turnpike roads. But the cartography did not change. This small map from 1746 by Robert Walker is typical of the genre. I find it curious how the fashion at the time was to isolate the county from its surroundings, as if it were an island amidst the terra incognita. The main road through Stratford seemed to be that from the northwest, crossing the bridge and heading for Banbury. Note that there was apparently no direct route to Ulster at the time, at least if you believe the map. The road from Cowton, this road that runs right diagonally across the country, is part of the old Salt Way from Droitwich to London. And so this was a really significant road in medieval times. This is a big one over there. By 1750, surveying technology had advanced with the invention of the theodolite for measuring angles and improved application of trigonometry. The cartographer Thomas Kitchen produced a series of large and beautifully decorated maps. Just move it to the left a bit, into the right, into the light, sorry, so that you can see these lovely illustrations all over the map. This one includes prospects of Tamworth, top left, and Guy's Cliff and Warwick Castle, top right. These are engravings comparable to what you would have to separate engravings in a book. This map, for the first time, names the town as Stratford upon Avon, the name we have now, and it marks Bishopton, Bridgetown, and Schotterhich. It also indicates the college, that is the ecclesiastical college, and that there is a market on Thursday. And there is a plausible town plan with 5 parallel streets in one direction and 2 in the other. I don't have an enlargement of that, but moreover, this shows all of the principal roads radiating out from Stratford, corresponding to those we know today. The road towards Ulster apparently ends at the Billesley intersection, but this doesn't mean that the road didn't exist, only that it had not been surveyed. No doubt there was a road of some sort. The road to Cowton follows the Ridgeway and crosses the Arne River through Great Arne, and you can still make your way across country today if you do that. You go up the hill on Ulster Road and turn right across the Ridgeway. It's an adventure to do it. Well, the cartographer's task is to represent on a 2-dimensional surface the landforms and relative positions of towns, rivers, and roads. To be effective, he must communicate clearly so that the reader can identify the local features in relation to the whole area covered. It's literally a mapping of 3D space onto a 2D surface. The principles of graphic design also apply, with the need to balance lettering, line work, symbols, and layout in an overall harmonious way. From this viewpoint, my favorite of all the 200 maps in my collection is this one by John Carey, made in 1789 and sold in his shop in St. Paul's Churchyard in London, where all the best printers were located, of course. And I think it's outstanding in its uncluttered clarity. 3 styles of lettering are used consistently for market towns, in capitals, villages in lowercase, and smaller places in italic. Careful judgment has been applied as to what to include and what to omit, so that at county level, everything is in visual equilibrium. This whole county map is balanced and pleasing to the eye. The Foss Way in particular is marvelously conspicuous on this map. Yet at local level, the enlarged map looks rather sparse. Minor roads are missing, for example, around Binton and Aston Cantlow. Small villages are absent, such as Shottery, Billesley, Tiddington, and Loxley. So we can see that scale matters. and the decisions about what to include and what to leave out depend on the area covered and the distance on the map, representing each mile on the ground. I'm now going to turn to town plans of Stratford. I'm sure this one is familiar to all of you. This is the earliest known town plan by Samuel Winter in 1759. This was a pen and ink drawing. The original of this is held in the archives at the Birthplace Trust. At this time, the number of houses in Stratford was about 430, and the population just under 2,300, more or less the same as it had been in Shakespeare's day. The plan shows clearly the medieval layout of the 3x3 grid of streets, 3x3. These are exactly the streets set out in the subdivision of the Bishop of Worcester's new town in 1196. They persisted all that time, and of course they're still there today. Note that this was measured in Gunter's chains. Gunter was eventually faded away, but the measure of chains remained as 66 feet or 22 yards, which of course is the length of a cricket pitch. So it's still familiar today. Winter's map shows the Bancroft rather like a water meadow with a small lake at the bottom of Sheep Street. That was probably the sheep dip, actually, where the sheep were taken. There are houses along the whole length of the Guild pits, and Middle Row extends well down Bridge Street. But there are few houses on the southwest side of the town. That is the left side of this map. Note that this is north on the map is over in that direction. It's not vertically upwards as one might expect. So there's not much in the west of Rother Street or Chestnut Walk, nothing in Sanctity Lane. This is the map that visitors would have used during Garrick's Jubilee in 1769. I'm always interested in the locality of the church. And so in this, the ecclesiastical college is shown clearly, this college of priests, which was just to the north of the church itself. And also it had the whole block there right up to Bull Lane. So all that area above to the west of the building was a pleasure garden for the secular priests whose job it was to serve in the chantry and church. The old priest's residence, called St. Mary's House, extends from the front gate of the church down to the river. That is on the church side of where the dell is now, just the other side of the wall between the church and the theatre gardens. Note that on the church, the charnel house is still shown, attached to the north side of the church's chancel. So it's this point here. That was demolished in 1799. "50 years later, Robert Bell Wheeler included a town plan as the frontispiece of his Guide to Stratford upon Avon, his second book in 1814. You've got it there, Margaret. Be careful with it because the cover's loose. But if you just open out the map, which is at the front. That's it. Yep, held it up. Yes, so this is very nicely drawn and engraved, and the frontispiece of Wheeler's Town Guide. But it's still clearly based on Winter's plan. The layout of this is exactly the same, just some points of detail are different. And so we could say that in 50 years, not very much seems to have changed. The Bancroft is now shown as an empty field with a couple of footpaths across it. And it was soon to be, very soon after this was made, soon to be excavated to make a canal basin with wharves along waterside. Also on this map, the borough boundary is shown by a dashed line. And that's the borough that was set out in the charter from Edward VI in 15, whenever it was, 53, I think. You see it here, coming along the river, crossing over, around, up here, up to Boundary Street, or Arden Street as it is now, and down just on the other side of the Guild Pits. That's the old borough boundary. It's interesting to see what's not inside the borough boundary. Namely, the ancient manorial precinct, that is the land of Stratford Manor, which included the mill, the church, and the dower house, and the college as it happened, but that manor goes back to Saxon times, so it predated the building of the college. The college was by now a ghostly memory, and so you see it's become rather insubstantial in the map. And its stone had been reused to build several large houses in the vicinity, including this one, Solly House, which is still there in Mill Lane. That's Mill Lane. And Avon Bank over here, which replaced St Mary's House. That was the first incarnation of Avon Bank. And also I believe, the orangery at the far end of the grounds of Avon Bank, which still stands today. Or returning to county maps, in the latter part of the 1700s, the countryside was changing as the Industrial Revolution gathered pace. Steam-powered factories were created, people were moving to cities, Coventry and Birmingham exploded in their populations, and a network of canals was being built. These first appeared on maps as strong, wavy black lines. Here we see a map published by Jones and Smith in 1804. This is, yes, that one. It's a folding map. In this edition, the sheet, after printing, was cut into 12 pieces and then stuck onto linen backing. And it's still in good shape. Hold it up, hold it in the light here so that People can see it. That's the map. And so that's one of the first maps of the county, which actually shows the Stratford Canal. Let's see a detail here. The town appears somewhat elongated in an east to west direction. And the Stratford Canal is prominently marked on the legend as navigable, although in fact it was still under construction and did not reach Stratford until 1816, 12 years later. But the publisher was optimistic. Notice that a planned but never built branch of the canal was to run from north of Wilmcote to a lime works near Binton. But it was never built. Borden Hill is marked here. The road to Ulster is now shown in full, with a dogleg where it skirts around the Overley estate. The Oversley estate near to Ulster. A large map at a scale of 1 inch to the mile was published in 1822 by the Greenwood brothers, based on a new survey. It's the biggest one, I think, where Jan is. No, huge one. No. It's on the... No. Yes, that one. Biggest one there. Yep, hold it in the light where it can be seen. So what Margaret is holding up there is 1/4 of the whole map. There are 3 more sheets of the same size. So he's holding up just this piece here, which has this really quite large engraving of Warwick Castle. It is dedicated to the nobility, clergy, and gentry of the county. So there is no doubt as to their target market. The map is so large that it's printed on 4 sheets, each of which is 26 by 21 inches. The actual route of the Stratford Canal is now shown, rather than the fantasy route on the previous map. And it's done in a more discreet style of drawing. The whole map is beautifully engraved and clearly printed with a dense black, so it's high contrast. Following Carey's good practice, 3 styles of lettering are used consistently. The street plan is presented in exquisite detail. So this is on that map that's being held up. Every house is shown. Of course, those town plans by Winter and Wheeler were already in circulation, but this is made from a new survey based on trigonometry and proper surveying. And it shows exactly the extent of the town in 1822. So you see the canal is this black line coming down and curving around down to the canal basin. And note the new development of houses between Guild Street and the canal. So in the top of this. I've got a pointer here somewhere. There, look at that. So all of this, there's Guild Street, all of that was new in the 1820s, and it was sort of a commercial development that followed the building of the canal. Well, as time went on in the 1800s, the day of the amateur and the private surveyor came to an end because the Ordnance Survey took over. It was formed in 1791, based at the Tower of London, and it was commissioned by Parliament to survey the whole of England and produce maps at a scale of 1 inch to the mile. Working their way northwards from the south coast, it took them until the 1830s to get to Warwickshire and to produce 6 sheets covering the county. This sheet is sheet 54, printed in 1832. This is the actual first edition of the Ordnance Survey map for Warwickshire, which also includes eastern bits of Worcestershire. Now the mapping is continuous. It does not stop at the county border. Borders, after all, are artificial constructs, whereas the land goes on. And it's also interesting to note that the width of the map reduces towards the top. Can you see there's a kind of a trapezium distortion on this? This is not a mistake or bad printing. It's because deliberately the edges of the map follow lines of longitude, which converging to the north. Sorry. Back. There we are. Compared with the idiosyncratic methods of earlier cartographers, the OS maps were made systematically by large teams of men using the best equipment and techniques available. Hence, they were extremely accurate and brought a wealth of new information. In particular, they showed the topography of the surface by fine hachures, little markings on the fall lines of slopes, giving an impression of the 3D surface. This is the area representing the Welcome Hills.
What date? What date?
It is 1832, this map, 1832, the first edition of the Ordnance Survey. So this area that you see here is about 2.5 by 1.5 inches on the map, and it shows how fine the detail is. Every house and garden is marked. New features in Stratford since the Greenwood map are the tramway bridge, built in 1823. So you can see it, second bridge across the river and the tramway coming vertically downwards there. And that's the beginning of the tram line towards Morton. Union Street had been built in 1830, allowing access from the High Street through to the new development by the canal. College Street had been created. You can see around the back of the college site. And there seem to be new houses in Shottery around the manor and Shottery Hall. Throughout the 19th century, printing technology developed in leaps and bounds. First, the use of steel plates instead of copper plates, then through lithography, first on stone, then transferring the drawings onto zinc plates. These innovations enabled longer print runs, they reduced the cost per map, and permitted the addition of printed colour, enabling alterations to be made more quickly. All of this was necessary for the mapping industry to respond to the latest revolution that was sweeping across the land, changing the face of countryside and society alike. You may guess that I'm talking about the advent of the railways. This map by Edward Weller was first published in 1858, based on the Ordnance Survey map, but at a reduced scale of 3 miles per inch. Have you found it there, Margaret? I think it's that one. I hope that's the right one. This is the 7th edition. Maybe I got the wrong one. This one you see on the screen is the 7th edition and has a spider's web of black lines all over the county, corresponding to the many new railways. The colour is printed using 3 additional plates with pink, green, and mauve inks. And so this became the norm in later Victorian England, that maps of this larger format and more colours and more fine detail. Here's the Stratford section. The first railway to reach Stratford was a branch line from Honeybourne in the southwest, opened by the Oxford, Worcester and Wolverhampton Railway in 1859. This was followed in 1860 by the Stratford-on-Avon railway branch from Hatton in the north. So it meant that the town was connected north to south with the national network. In 1861, the 2 lines were linked with a new joint station on the present site, just in time for the influx of visitors for the Shakespeare tercentenary in 1864. Then the east and west junction railway line to Fenny Compton to the east was opened in 1873, and this was extended in 1879 to Broome in the west, where it connected with the Evesham and Redditch Railway. Remember, every one of these lines was operated by a separate company, and every one of them had an act of parliament to establish it and set up the provision for shareholders. The east-west line had its own station to the west of the town at the end of New Street and crossed the river via a newly built Seven Meadows Bridge. The link between the 2 stations had a level crossing at Evesham Road, whereas a bridge was constructed for Sanctus Road. The lines on the map here, denoting the railways, are disproportionately thick and black, demanding attention, because ordinary people who could now afford mass-produced maps were keen to see where the railway lines went, and map makers needed to demonstrate that their maps contained the desired information. There was many companies producing things like this, and they were all competing. So we're getting to the end of my presentation now. I'd like to conclude with this one. As time passed, the Ordnance Survey came to dominate the industry. Other publishers continued to produce maps, notably Bartholomew in Edinburgh, but they used OS survey information under license. So they bought the mapping data and then reformatted or represented for perhaps for a different audience. But there wasn't a level playing field because then the OS began to compete directly with those publishers, producing their own maps to appeal to the consumer market. And so this little folded map from 1919 is shown here. And this combines the authority of the Ordnance Survey with attractive graphics and packaging, which came to set the national standard. Looking at the detail of this, this was first published in 1915 and revised in 1919. It uses colour effectively to encode the topographic information. Blue for rivers, red for main roads, orange for secondary roads, green for woodland, etc. The visual presentation in this map, this is over 100 years old, but it's so familiar and clear that today we could use this map perfectly well. The grid squares are marked at 2-mile intervals, and bearings of latitude and longitude are given in the borders as degrees and minutes. And until the advent of sat-navs, really, this was how we navigated ourselves around the country. Surface relief is no longer shown by hachures on the fall lines, but by contours of height above sea level at intervals of 50 feet. Of course, it's the same information. The contour is perpendicular to the fall line. So it's just a different representation of the height of the ground. Railways are marked more discreetly on these maps, with much more information, including stations, cuttings, embankments, bridges, and viaducts. Zooming in on Stratford, now around the time of the First World War, we can see some evidence of growth of the town in the 80 years since the first OS map of 1832. The town as shown here is very similar to the one that's on the wall of our exhibition at Harvard House, from the one on the left as you go in from 1914. By now, Albany Road and Wellesbourne Grove had been created. Villas were creeping up Maidenhead Road and terraces along Clopton Road to the north. Factories were appearing along Birmingham Road. Old Town was expanding south of Sanctus Lane towards the station. Houses were being built along Shottery Road, but had not yet quite merged with Shottery itself. Still, almost nothing had changed to the east and south of the river. There were still meadows across the river from the theatre, and virtually no development over there. All in all, at that time, just over 100 years ago, Stratford was still a small market town, gathered around the medieval grid of streets. And many would say, in agreement with Ursula Bloom, that it was a golden age, and that, with the continuous growth that has gone on ever since, the quality of life has declined. Through maps, we get a glimpse of that process. Thank you.